Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and a little while ago I did a video about putting everything in Warcry into a tier list based on budget. You can take a look at that video, the link will be down below. But in the meantime, I decided to keep digging into how to do Warcry cheaply, because I think it's really important, because that's one of the big strengths of Warcry, is how much easier it is to play than every other tabletop miniatures game. So right now, I want to do a countdown of the top 5 warbands under 50 bucks. And just for a quick refresher, here's what the budget tier list I came to comes down to. And a big thing here is a lot of the A tier, it's super easy to build something really powerful and really wide-ranging, like all the options of the faction, for just around $80 to $90. But there are some ways to go even cheaper than that, and that's what I'm going to explore here. Now, let's get into the top 5 warbands under $50. I'm going to start with Flesh Eater Courts, and what you get if you do a box of Crypt Ghouls, plus a box of Dreadblade Harrows. The list looks like this: 2 Crypt Ghast, because the box comes with 20 Crypt Ghouls, so 2 sprues of 10, each sprue gives you a Crypt Ghast. And then 10 Crypt Ghouls and a Dreadblade Harrow. Now, ghouls are pretty interesting in that for 55 points you get something pretty quick, where the damage isn't terribly impressive, but if your opponent charges into a crowd of them, it will add up pretty quickly. Then you get your Dreadblade Harrow to resurrect things back if you want to, especially resurrecting your Crypt Ghasts back, which is one of the only things here that can kind of fight a little and do a little bit of extra damage. The Dreadblade Harrow also will fight a little bit better than you expect it to. I know the attack profile doesn't look like all that much, but for the cheap price and for the flying, you'll find that you get them into combat quite a bit. This kind of warband is going to be really excellent on the new Rumble Pack missions, which have a ton of objectives spread all the way across the board, where you want to have a lot of bodies, and you want those bodies to be fast, to be able to cover everything, to be able to shuffle from one objective to the other. So this list has a surprising number of tools, and of course is incredibly cheap at exactly $50. If you want to expand on Flesh Eater Courts, I would actually wait a little bit. Now, you can always get the Start Collecting, which is an excellent box for both Warcry and for Age of Sigmar. But there are rumors floating around about a partial line refresh for Flesh Eater Courts coming soon, where it won't be everything, but it'll be a couple kits, maybe a couple heroes and one of the infantry troops. So I would maybe wait. And if Flesh Eater Courts doesn't get expanded in the next 4 or 5 months, then you could go and add more to this warband. And if you were doing that, based on just what's out right now, I would go with Crypt Horrors and the Abhorrent Archregent or Archking to go with Chosen of the King combos. But you could also bring in Sons of Velmorn, the Underworld's warband that has incredible Graveguard sculpts that are really beautiful and gives a little extra dimension to Flesh Eater Courts. Those will be kind of slower, cheap fighters, but you already have the speed covered, so you can afford to bring in a few slow friends if you want to. The other option would be a Vargulf Courtier, maybe in place of the Dreadblade Harrow, maybe alongside it. And those, just if you're willing to babysit them with dice, they can output quite a bit of damage. The next is going to be the Ogre Glutton box. Now, Gluttons go for 55 bucks from GW, but from most online retailers, you can find them for 47. And what's really nice about them is that you don't just get Gluttons, which are perfectly fine in Warcry, but you also get little Gnoblars to run around with them. You get 4 of them, in fact. And so that gives you quite a few options to build a warband from. I would go with a Crusher for 245 points. The Crusher is an absolute monster in melee combat. Move 4, but you can give it +3 move with a double, which means that you can actually motor it around the board pretty well. And then I would add in 3 Ogre Gluttons and 3 Gnoblars, giving you 7 models, but the ability to absolutely just win all of the fights that matter and just have a few people to, use weight actions and kind of get around the board if they need to. Ogres are incredibly terrifying in fights, and so I think you'll have a lot of fun with this warband if that's what you like to do, is get up close and personal. If you want to expand your Ogre Glutton box, you have a few pretty good options. The first two I would look to, the main ones I would look to, would be either getting the Gobapalooza, which is a Gloomspite Gits pack where all of them have the ally rune mark, even if they're not heroes. They all have really interesting abilities, and you can play around with that. Or you could get some Frost Sabers or Yetis. They both sort of do the same job here. So a sample list with this would just be to go down one Glutton and bring in a Frost Saber, and then you can play another Gnoblar. This will give you the ability to have one heavy hitting Ogre in every deployment group, but then you also get to have a Frost Saber to run around the field, chasing down treasure carriers, running from one objective to the other, and then you have 4 Gnoblars to just kind of cover the field, count as bodies on objectives, things like that. Use weight actions, all of that good stuff. So this list has a little bit more utility than the previous list, is going to be a little bit more versatile in more situations. And Frost Sabers also output a decent amount of damage for their price and movement. Stuff that maybe you wouldn't always expect or your opponent might get caught napping on. By the way, if you're excited to play some of these warbands, there's quite a few opportunities coming up to try them out. The best thing I would suggest is going to Best Coast Pairings, which will show you everyone who's listed their event on the site. But way more than half of Warcry tournament organizers don't list their tournaments on the site. So while there you'll see tournaments in Spain, you'll see tournaments in Poland, you'll see a few tournaments in the US. You won't see all of them. So for example, I recently heard about Zeke's Comics in Peoria, Illinois. They host tournaments every 2 months, and you won't see them on BCP, but if you go contact the store, you'll be able to find out. I'm also going to be hosting a tournament in Game Center on March 12th. I wish I'd put that there in the slide, but that's going to be a great time. I'm hoping to make it be sort of a tune-up to Adepticon for people to try out their lists, but people are welcome to just come by and play games. If you're in the upper Midwest, we'd love to see you. Also, some cool news, Adepticon has expanded their competitive tournament. They had been capping it at 30 spots. They've actually increased the cap to 40, which is great to see. I love that. So now there's new spots open for anyone who wants to play some Warcry on Thursday night. I know it's supposedly the competitive tournament, but let's be real, the Warcry scene isn't the most competitive anyway, so even if you are, have just played a few games or don't have the most hardcore list, you're still going to be able to have a ton of fun at that tournament. Also, the Atlantic City Open is going to be having Warcry for the first time ever. They'll have 24 spots available. It's going to be actually run by the first Adepticon champion, Kyle Hall. He went 4-0 with Sylvaneth. And that's going to be really exciting, of course, run by someone who really knows what they're doing. And so anyone who's along the Eastern Seaboard, you should absolutely consider getting over to, I'm pretty sure it's in Philadelphia, but don't quote me on that. It's somewhere in the Mid-Atlantic, and I think you'll have a great time. Now, number 3 is going to be the Zangor box. This goes for $50 from Games Workshop, so you can usually find it for about $43 from online retailers. The list, if you just have one box, I would do 2 Twist Braves, 3 Zangor with paired blades, 2 Zangor mutants, and 3 Zangor Great Blades. Now, the box only comes with 2 Zangor Great Blades, but the banner carrier has just a 2-handed giant banner that they throw around, and then you can also see that with the musician, who will have a tuba, a horn of some kind, and then the other hand is free, and you can just put an axe in that hand. And so that'll get you to a couple more with paired blades and another great blade. This is a really solid list. Zangors have a surprising amount of health for how fast they are and how little they cost. And so this gets you 10 models, the ability to kind of go all the way around the board, have some staying power on objectives. Your Twist Braves can do some legitimate fighting, and so you're going to be able to have a lot of flexibility with a list like this. Now, if you do want to expand on it, Tzeentch has so many options, and Chaos does in general. So one way you could do it is with getting the Zangor on disc. the box that will make Skyfires, it'll make Enlightened, you can get the heroes out of it. Another really good option, I think, is the Ogre Mawtribes. You can also get Varangard or any of the big Chaos allies right now that are pretty good. So, for example, the Spheranx, the Crusher, the Myrmidon. So a list that you could do with just a few of these choices, just getting 2 of them, would be the Ogre Mawtribes, and then you'd have room for either the Spheranx, the Crusher, or the Myrmidon. And then just 3 Zangors and 2 Zangor Greatblades. This list, again, is a lot like the other one, where you'll have that flexibility and that movement and that staying power of the Zangor, but then you get to have 2 pretty heavy hitters here, and all 3 of the bespoke allies are really solid in that role. So there's a lot you can do. This is a really cool option because you get a pretty functional list, a very functional list, right from one box, and then your opportunities to expand are nearly endless. And so it kind of hits both of those goals, and that's really wonderful to see. Now we're getting into the real the gold here. So Kruleboyz, you can get Gut Rippas for $22 online on eBay, and you can get a Killaboss and Stabgrot for $10. That's absurd, and it's because of Dominion that all of those prices are so cheap, because people break those boxes down. Now, a lot of people feel like they like the sword a little bit better than the spear in Warcry, but it's really, really close, because of course the spear gives you that 2-inch reach, and they all have the great durability anyway. And so usually when you get that $22 box, it'll be all spears, and that's fine. So you can play a Gut Rippa boss with the Wicked Sticka, 8 Gut Rippas, which are just so hard to take off the board, a Stabgrot, and then the Killaboss with Haka and Flail, which is a really excellent little combat piece that I think that you'll have no regrets using. They're really, really effective, and one of the better options actually for Kruleboyz for leaders. This is a list with a ton of staying power. Gut Rippas are really tough to take off the board, and your Killaboss is going to be a really nice combat piece, giving you a lot of options there. As a really cheap budget list, this is a really, really nice one. And the crazy thing about expanding Kruleboyz is that, a lot like Zangor, you just have so many options, and unlike the Zangor expansion options, your options are also crazy budget friendly. So if you want to get the full Dominion half, instead of just paying $32, which incredible that you can just pay $32 for such a functional list, if you want to go up to 65, you can get the entire Dominion half for Kruleboyz and just have tons and tons of options everywhere. You could also get some Troggoths, some Rotgut Troggoths, which are really solid. You could get any of the Ironjaw's heroes are really good here. You could have the War Chanter, which is giving plus attacks. You could have the Mega Boss, which is just an incredible combat piece. You could get Brutes, which the Brute Hero is a really nice ally to get in there. So a lot of different options that go well with Kruleboyz. The possibilities are nearly endless. I built a list here with, if you got Troggoths plus the Gabapalooza, I think this is a very competitive little Kruleboyz list, very similar to something a friend of mine had a winning record with in the tournament that I played, or that I ran in January. So you go with a Killaboss with Haka and Flail, 2 Rotgut Troggoths, which work really well with the Gut Rippas. You'll run 4 here, because the Rotgut Troggoths with their toughness 5 and their 28 wounds for only 185 points are just so hard to remove. And then you have 4 Gut Rippas, which are also hard to remove. And then you have this Brugit that can turn any of your Trogs. Remember, they only have 3 attacks. The Brugit can give them additional 3 more attacks, double their damage, and just make them into these absolute blenders. Troggoths on their own are really anvil pieces, but when they're comboed up with the Brugit, they turn into hammers as well, which is really powerful. And then of course you can have the Boggle-Eye here, which is essentially a net, and that can disrupt your opponent. And this list just gives you a ton of different options. This is a legitimately competitive list, and it can be had, you know, from just starting on such a cheap $32 base. So I think Kruleboyz are a wonderful faction to give to beginners, and probably the second best in the entire game. Number one, though, and this should probably surprise nobody, is Stormcast. The box of Vindictors is $55 from GW, but whereas some of these other ones from GW where it's $55, you can actually get this for $35 online instead of like $47 or so. And the reason is a lot of people will have it from Dominion. Now, I'm also showing these $17 ones if you want to just get 5 of them. Now, a list of all, I've got Vanquishers here, even though it's Vindictors, but a list of all Vindictors is going to be taking more than 5, but in sort of more competitive builds, you might only run 5. And so getting the 5 for $17 is a really solid start if you want to skip. But if you just want to do Vindictors, then for $35, you can do just 7 Vindictors. I ran this list in narrative. It was really good. I went 3-1 with just, a shocking budget list. Someone also won a tournament in Kansas City, Missouri with this list. They actually beat 2 monster warbands, which this was back before the monster nerf because toughness 6 was just so hard for monsters to clear off the board. And that's just going to be true in general. All of these Vindictors have 20 wounds, toughness 6. A lot of warbands are just not going to be able to get rid of them. And so you will just grind opponents off the table slowly. And then one thing I love about playing with Vindictors is they have the 2-inch reach, but unlike a lot of 2-inch reach fighters, they're not completely pillow-fisted. They don't have the most intense output, but the fact that they can cover each other so that you can't go, if you have 1-inch reach, you just can't go and fight multiple Vindictors without fighting all of them at once, and then all of them get to double attack on you. And that's an absolute nightmare. So this warband, there's not a lot of abilities to play with, but there's a ton of utility as far as positioning and ways to kind of outposition your opponents. And that's going to be a playstyle that I think a lot of people are going to like. Now, some expansion possibilities if you start with Vindictors are nearly endless. Now, of course, just like Kruleboyz, one really great option is to get the entire Dominion half. The Stormcast one goes for a little bit more than the Kruleboyz half goes for, but you can still usually get it for around $80, $85 for the entire half. You could also go with just Annihilators, or you could grab some allies. Here's a list. If you just grab one ally, the Old Guard is basically a generic dwarf hero with a shield and a hammer. You can take any sort of Tolkien-esque D&D miniature, whatever third-party miniature you like, any old world GW miniature that you just maybe alter a little bit can be turned into an Old Guard. Any dwarf really can be an Old Guard, and the kit is so hard to find and so old that no one's going to call you on not having the original. And then if you just get some Annihilators to go with your Vindictors, then you can run an Annihilator Prime with the Grand Hammer, an Old Guard, 4 Vindictors, and another Annihilator with the Grand Hammer. This is a list that can get around the board more than you would think for having 2 3-inch move fighters, because the Vindictors have that 2-inch range. Their 4-inch move plus 2-inch range actually ends up feeling in game like they just get wherever they need to go. And then of course you have the 2-inch range on the 2 Annihilators here, which mitigates the 3-inch move. And you also have that Tempest Eye ability, which even though the Tempest Eye ability was nerfed to no longer be the full value of the dice, but to be half the value, giving +2 move to your warband is still amazing, and the Old Guard is a legitimate fighter in his own right. So I think that Stormcast Thunderstrike is an incredible way to start the game, and anytime anyone asks me what warband they should start with, I'm always going to either say Stormcast, Kruleboyz, or Tzaentch, or Tzeentch Mortals, really, because all 3 of those are just such amazing places to go and can be had so cheaply and give you great expansion opportunities into competitive warbands. So that's all of them. If you have another $50 or less list that you know of that you really want to boost up and talk about, please put it in the comments. There's a few others out there that are functional. And then if you just go up just a little bit into like the $60, $70 range, all of a sudden a ton of factions are open to you. So that's the really beautiful thing about Warcry, in my opinion, and I hope you think so too. I'm going to be coming out with more Warcry videos in the future, so until then, may all your rolls be crits.